Well, with the Middle East virtually up in the flames again, following the US-Israeli attack on Iran and the subsequent closure of the strategic strata of Hormuz, which handles the bulk of the global oil shipping traffic, countries like Nigeria in the global south are again standing on the precipice of the unknown. Spiking oil prices should be a great benefit to them, but anxiety grows regarding how all the volatility might impact the cost of goods and services, especially in these countries. Joining us now to make sense of all of this is Kelvin Emmanuel, who is an energy economist and co-founder at Jerry Hills. Good morning, Kelvin. Good to have you join us on the morning show this beautiful but interesting Sunday morning.
Good morning, Steve. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Such a pleasure to be here, as always.
All right. Thank you, Kelvin. Let's start with what is happening in the Middle East. You recall just a few months ago when we spoke about what happened in Venezuela when Maduro was, practically picked up and landed in New York, part of, and you were on the show to analyze, how this could be an issue in terms of the prices for oil, particularly for a country like Nigeria and Africa in general. But here we are. It looks like we have a bigger problem on our hands. What's your initial assessment of what is happening over there in the Middle East, particularly in Iran, and the effects that we should prepare for as far as the price of oil will be concerned?
Steve, thank you so much. A little bit of context, because, some people who are watching us this morning might not actually understand the Iranian and U.S. conflicts that has drawn in Israel over the years. So a little bit of context so the audience will understand where we're coming from. So, in 1951, the Prime Minister of Iran then, Mohammad Hadassah, had nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, and, it angered the UK government then, and the UK government worked with the US government. So, the foreign arm of the UK intelligence is MI6. The local arm is MI5, just like you have the NIA and DSS in Nigeria. And the MI6 worked with the CIA to overthrow Mohammed, the prime minister, in 1951. Then in 1953, the Shah took over and then embarked on some kind of reforms that led to the White Revolution in 1963 and created a lot of economic inequality and what Iranians called corruption. And in 1975, the Shah outlawed the other political parties and made Iran a one-party state. Up until this time, Iran was actually a secular state. But then when Ayatollah Khamenei went on exile and came back with increasing popularity because he was the most loudest and vocal opposition against the Shah's regime. And the Shah went on exile in 1978. In 1979, Ayatollah Khamenei came back and made Iran like an Islamic state. And, the Ayatollah came back and, implemented what he had accused the Shah of. He started using the SAVAK that was created by Israel with the help of Israel and the CIA, Mossad and the likes of them, and then created the Quds forces in the Iranian army, which is like the elite forces in the Iranian army called the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, the IRGC, and then started, funding Hezbollah and Hamas and proxy militant group against their enemies. And you've seen what Hezbollah and Hamas has done in the Middle East over the years, So this is where we're coming from. And back then, the fear that the US and UK government had was that with the nationalization of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, that the oil and the oil sector in Iran was going to go into the control of Russia. And you've seen that play out again, because if you look at the strategic geopositioning, you see that the US government is working with Israel and is working with some forces in the EU and the UK to, restrict the amount of oil that goes to China. Iran today is doing about 3.2 million barrels of crude. Okay? They have more than 400 shadow fleet vessels because Iran is under sanctions. You know, on the 16th of July 2015, Obama, after about 20 months of negotiation, facilitated the signing of what they call the P5+1 agreement. And interestingly, China and Russia were part of that P5 negotiations. Germany was the +1, plus the European Union that came with Germany, you know, that said that Iran was going to stop enriching isotopes up to 70, 80, and that can form a nuclear bomb. And when Donald Trump won that, they rescinded on the P5+1 and they pulled out of that agreement, and we're back to square one. So you have a situation where you have Venezuela, Iran. Iran has been supplying a lot of naphtha and refined petroleum products to Venezuela because PDVSA cannot refine Venezuelan crude to supply the domestic demands of petroleum products in Venezuela. In turn, Venezuela gives Iran heavy crude and gold as payment in crude oil and commodity swap deals for that supply. Iran provides a lot of technical support for Russian oil and gas sector, both upstream and midstream. Iran exports crude oil to China. About 1.5 million barrels of crude oil is exported to China. And if you look at what happens in the Malaccan Straits, which is like a shipping channel through which crude oil goes from Malaysia to Indonesia and then China, where they do ship-to-ship transfer, STS, to mask the identity of the vessels and the country of origin of the crude to avoid US sanctions. You see that the US is trying to play a game where it can stop crude oil supply, cheap crude oil supply to China, and stop technical support that Iran provides to Russia, you know, in a triangle that involves Venezuela, Iran, Russia, and China. Because for years that Iran has been under sanctions from the West, and it's not able to do any official bank transactions and bring its crude oil to the official markets, you know, Russia and China has been a major source of support for taking its crude oil that gives it competitive advantage against other refiners around the world. So this is the cycle, and this is the historical antecedents. But what will typically happen over the next 24, 48 to 72 hours is that, number one, 20.7 million barrels of crude passes through the Straits of Hormuz. You know, that Straits of Hormuz is like a tiny aperture that links the UAE and Oman on the two sides of the divide, and on the other side with Iran. You know, and that crude oil comes from Saudi Arabia, it comes from Bahrain, it comes from the UAE, you know, and it's going, about 84% is going to China and Southeast Asia. So if traders, you know, when they wake up tomorrow morning, they see that the Iranian Revolutionary Guards and the SAVAK still has serious control over the government in Iran, despite the assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei, you know, you're going to see that crude oil prices will jump. But OPEC says they have an emergency meeting in Vienna today by conference call, and they most likely are going to announce an increase in supply of 400,000 barrels per day to avoid any sharp spike. And you can also see that production and indemnity insurance, which is like a PI indemnity insurance for companies who own shipping vessels and ship around the world, has announced that they're canceling contracts and they're increasing their premiums by another 50%.
Right.
Crude oil prices will go up. The implication for Nigeria is that the revenue accretion for the government is going to increase because the government benchmark for crude oil price is about around $64.85 per barrel for 2026 Appropriation Act. You know, but on the other hand, if crude oil prices go up, the price of petroleum products will go up because we're now in a post-subsidy era, and any increase in the price of crude oil means that the refinery, for example, Dangote Refinery, is going to have to revise its price based on its cracking margins on the realities we have on ground today.
Okay, and while all of this, of course, is going to increase Nigeria's FX inflows, could you once again state what the price of oil is today, and how does this negatively affect or impact our domestic economy, especially given that, you know, we have a continued reliance on imported products?
Look, I mean, thank God that we're no longer, completely reliant on importing transportation fuels into Nigeria. 62% of the supply of petroleum products today, mostly AGO, jet fuel, and premium motor spirits, is actually, comes from a domestic refiner. So definitely you're going to see that LNG prices will go up. The price of LNG will go up for spot prices, not for forward prices. Naturally, that should impact on whatever revenues that are due to the Federation from NLNG, even if it doesn't have a lot of room, because the amount of spots it has is very limited. It has issues around the supply of gas feedstock. If crude oil price goes up to about $100, it will impact on how much revenues comes to the government, especially now with Executive Order 9 that the president has signed that says that 30% of profit oil and gas should be paid directly from PSE assets to the Federation account without going to NNPC, in line with Section 64, 1 and 3 and 4 of the PIA. Okay? But, the near-term implication also, is that, look, if crude oil prices go up, the price of PMS and diesel will go up in Nigeria, which might impact on the cost price index inflation in Nigeria and that inflation to interest yield curve outlook that the central bank is looking at. So it's a double-edged sword.
All right, Kevin, I get you. I get your point, very well, double-edged sword. But then, if Nigeria has not been able to meet its OPEC quota, for, I believe, about 4 or 5 consecutive, if not 6 years consecutively, we're struggling in terms of our output. If the outcome of the emergency OPEC meeting says, you are allowed additional 400,000 barrels a day, what does that say to Nigeria that we've not been able to meet our quota ab initio? And then specifically in terms of what to expect, I get the point that at $64, $65 a barrel that is in our budget for 2026, if oil, as we're hearing, if crude goes to about $72, $75, that's a gain for Nigerian government. If it goes beyond $100, of course, that's also like a windfall. But to the ordinary people, who will be patronizing the pump price, what will that mean? For Dangote Refinery, for example, are we likely to go back to more than 1,000 naira per litre if it goes to more than $100 per barrel?
Steve, it's a painful reality that in 2026, we're still talking about 1.45, 1.47. A few times you see the output go above 1.5 million, temporarily, and then it will drop back. It's a very painful reality. Steve, I've always said that the issues we have upstream in E&P, they are more structural than they are. There's a fiscal side to it, but there are more structural issues that needs to be tackled by the government. I don't know if I have time to talk about the issues around the governance and financial model, and the fact that NNPC as concessionaire has not done such a great job with the JVs and the PSCs, and the fact that, Nigeria still, the government can still not categorically say that the numbers that are reported by NAPIMS at NNPC as daily production is actually what Nigeria produces, because Nigeria remains one of those few countries in the world that doesn't have an hydrocarbon accounting framework end-to-end to tell it real time, not based on fiscal inspectors at flow stations, lease accountability custody transfer units telling it what the flow rates are, for the daily production. You need wellhead metering first. For me, that is the bucket that is leaking. It says that if you pour water into a basket, regardless of how intense the flow rate of the water is, the ability for the basket to hold the water will not change, because the basket has holes that leaks. If you don't plug the holes, even if you increase the flow rate of the output for crude, you still will not be able to make significant progress. So, the government needs to focus on first setting up an hydrocarbon accounting framework that is automated, number one. The government needs to focus on, remodeling its petroleum fiscal regime, and repurposing NNPC, as a joint venture partner and as also a direct operator through NEPL, Yankoff, the forward financial and technical service agreement model is always operated. Yankoff, the carry agreement structure where the operators carry it and then inflate cost recoveries and cheat the federation in revenues. Work on structural issues that can reduce the unit cost production per barrel, so that you can increase output steadily over time. But, on the question you asked on the implication of a rising price, increase in crude oil price on pump prices of petrol, this is the reality. In post-subsidy, where Sections 205 has been implemented and the government is not providing an under-recovery from its domestic crude intervention stock of 445,000 per barrel, any increase in price of crude oil by $5, $10, and especially with the likely increase in premiums charged by Protection and Indemnity Club, which is a pool for shippers around the world, especially when you consider that Dangote is also importing about 50% of the crude that it uses to refine in Lagos, it's simply going to translate to an increase in the price of petroleum products, unfortunately.
Up to how much,
price
Kelvin?
goes above $85,
Yeah.
if price goes above $85 a barrel, we might see petrol prices trade at over 1,000 naira per liter.
More than 1,000. All right.
Yes.
Okay. So we should be prepared, like Boy Scout.
Yeah, we should be prepared. This is, look, Steve, I'll tell you what. Dangote imports about 50% of the crude he needs into Nigeria. A lot of that crude comes from the US today. So you can imagine P&I Club. It's a club of insurers around the world that are focused on marine and maritime sector. Now, you can imagine that they've cancelled those insurance premiums and they've asked for a revision up, which means that the cost of shipping is going to go up for tanker vessels that carry crude around the world. That impacts on the bottom line of the refiner and is going to, go into its costs and refiner's margin. So if the cracking margin spreads increase, definitely the domestic refiner has to adjust the price of petroleum products so that it doesn't run at a loss. It's what happens when the market is deregulated and when it's based on the forces of demand and supply.
Right.
But, this step that OPEC Plus is likely going to take today when they meet, where they might announce an increase of 400,000 barrels in supply hike. Kazakhstan has been fighting for an increase in that quota to produce more crude oil to the markets. You might likely see any sharp spike in prices to $100 and above.
Kelvin, what's actually the price of oil today? And also, since we're selling our oil in naira to the refineries, what will be the economics of the price increase?
Nigeria is not selling crude oil to Dangote in naira. I don't think it's getting up to 50,000 barrels in that naira-based crude swap. That is not true, however. So most of the crude he buys in Nigeria is paid for in dollars. As a matter of fact,
excuse me, sorry, I was mistaken. I was mistaken, obviously.
Okay. I was saying, as a matter of fact, he's complained severally that despite the fact that he's buying crude oil in dollars, he still has to pay commissions, third-party commissions of as much as $30 a barrel, in addition to what he's paying at the fiscal oil price for crude oil that is purchased in Nigeria.
But what about the fact that we work with Brent, Kelvin? Will that, shouldn't that in a way, I won't say insulate us, but, give us some respite, And you didn't quite answer my question about the 400,000 additional allocation that might be given. We will be able to at least measure up in some ways.
Steve, when it comes to crude oil pricing, Nigeria uses the dated Brent model to price, most of the crude. I think only about 2 or 3 of the 34 blends of crude oil that is drilled in Nigeria is below API of 30 degrees. They call it what Northwestern Europe Northwest Europe, sorry,
Yeah.
NWE. So West Africa does not have a pricing benchmark. It uses the Northwest Europe benchmark, which is the Brent's dated Brent pricing model. So any crude oil that comes from Nigeria, because most of it is light crude with API above 30 degrees, it's usually priced along with the Brent basket. And that is the one that actually goes up faster than the WTI, because there's usually like a $4 to $5 spread between the WTI and the Northwestern Europe pricing benchmark, which is the dated Brent. So what you're seeing basically is that as Brent prices go up, and it takes WTI along that $4 to $5 spread margin, you're also going to see Nigerian crude grades price go up simultaneously, because Nigeria is priced along with Northwestern Europe pricing benchmark.
All right, Kevin.
You also, Steve, you also asked the question about the impact of 400,000 barrel.
Absolutely,
hike,
I've asked you twice.
OPEC
Yes,
Plus
yes.
On, I don't think it's going to make a significant dent, because the world consumes around, I'll say, 108 million barrels of crude oil on a daily basis. If, for example, the crude oil traders see that in the next 24 hours, the IRGC and SAVAK has not been significantly weakened, and they have the, capacity to actually block the Straits of Hormuz and prevent crude oil from passing that channel into the Arabian Sea, mostly to the Malaccan Straits and to China and other markets around the world, they are going to price in those premiums and price of crude oil will go up. So I don't think that OPEC announcing a hike, it's more like, I'll say it's more symbolic than it actually, the risk of a possible closure. And, you've seen bombs go off in Abu Dhabi, in Riyadh, in Dubai, that's impacting on the price of crude against OPEC Plus announcing a supply of 400,000 barrels, and it's, taming that hike in the price of crude. I'll give it more to the geopolitical risk of these unintended consequences and Straits of Hormuz being closed, and the impact of a supply hike from OPEC taming the price of crude oil going up. So, it depends. Let's see. It's an ongoing situation over the next 24, 48 hours. It's something that we can't say, if this happens, this will go like this. It's a chessboard. So if the US and Israel are able to weaken the Quds forces significantly, and there is the Iranian army surrenders to Israel and Iran, then we might likely see this risk of crude oil prices accelerating up tamed over the next 48 or 72 hours. But it's an ongoing situation.
But you don't think that with Dangote getting between 5 to 9 cargoes of crude in Naira, that should provide some kind of buffer, to the to Nigerians when it comes to, pricing?
Steve, Dangote gets 6 cargoes of crude from NNPC. He doesn't get it in Naira.
He doesn't?
I don't think Dangote is currently getting up to... He doesn't get it in Naira. That Naira-based crude swap deal that was done in 2024 and was reinforced in 2025, that deal is not alive. The NNPC is not supplying him up to 100,000 barrels of crude in Naira. Most of the crude he buys from Nigeria is in US dollars. And like I said earlier, he still has to pay a third-party commission, because there was like an opening in sections 109 that was put there deliberately, willing buyer, willing seller, and which the regulator, NUPRC, has not provided a gazette, to define clearly what willing buyer, willing seller means. Because willing buyer, willing seller should not be an excuse for operators to come and say they have stabilization clauses on PFX loans, so they can't give crude to the refiner, so they have to give to Vitol to sell to him, and Vitol goes ahead and adds $3 to $5 depending on in fact, on Bonga, for example, on crude produced in Delta State in Bonga started production in 2006, is paying premiums of as high as $6.20, which are third-party commissions. And a lot of these commissions, and the government is not collecting tax on it. These are third-party commissions that are not disclosed to Nigeria. The Nigerian Revenue Service, FIRS, is not even taxing these traders on these commissions that are earned. So Dangote is not getting 5 to 9 cargoes in Naira. He's getting less than 50,000 barrel crude oil, based on the Naira.
Kelvin, I'll return to that subject matter again. I know, of course, that Alhaji Aliko Dangote has indeed confirmed that he gets, up to 5, cargoes of crude in Naira. Here you are saying that it's not correct. Are you sure of your facts?
Steve,
yeah.
He gets crude. He gets cargoes from NNPC.
Yes.
The question we should ask is
in
that
Naira.
all the cargoes he gets from NNPC actually paid in Naira or dollars? That's the question we should ask.
Okay.
That's the question we should ask.
All right. I mean, I get you, Kevin. I mean, we're totally out of time. We would have loved to ask you about the gas master plan, given what NISO put out recently. But of course, we will have another opportunity to speak more about that, in relationship to how low electricity this time around has to do with low gas supply, which is a subject matter that you'll have love to speak about. But we'll do that another time, Kelvin. Thank you so much for joining us on The Morning Show.